Director of Assurance and Risk for ASI, and I just want to spend a couple of minutes with you talking about the importance of biodiversity and ecosystem services. Biodiversity are the plants and animals that we see around us every day. Plants and animals being flora and fauna. It's also the ecosystem services that our flora and fauna provide that are just as important. For the effective management of biodiversity, there's a series of steps and sequences that an entity can go through to ensure effectiveness of their controls and to ensure conformance to our standard. The very first step is to actually find out what's around, what's in your entity's area of influence. Not just what's on site, but also what's around the site. What an entity needs to do is biodiversity risk assessment. This relates to criterion 8.1 of the standard, and that's for you internally or to engage an external specialist to see what flora, what fauna, what communities, habitats, and importantly, ecosystem services may be present in your area of influence. Don't be surprised. You may be operating in an industrial facility, an industrial park, a commercial area, and think, there's no biodiversity around here, there's nothing but concrete, steel, and car parks. You may be surprised. Using those existing tools that are out there for free, using ASI's Performance Standard guidance, or engaging technical specialists, external consultants to help you, do a risk assessment and identify what those biodiversity and ecosystem services features may be present within your area of influence. This is the first step and a very, very important step. More importantly, it is mandatory and it applies to all entities. If your risk assessment has identified any species, habitats, communities, and/or ecosystem services of significance, the entity must then develop a biodiversity action plan. This forms criterion 8.2 and 8.3 of the Performance Standard. This plan must be also publicly disclosed for the benefits of your stakeholders, but most importantly, address those features identified in your risk assessment of importance, identify those and come up with actions for you to effectively manage and mitigate any potential risks to those species and features. An important component of your biodiversity action plan is the communication and engagement piece. You must communicate and engage regularly, sincerely, and openly with your external stakeholders. They may include local landowners, your neighbours, local school groups, community groups, other NGOs, and also, most importantly, those affected populations and Indigenous peoples where relevant. Don't underestimate the importance of engaging your external stakeholders in your biodiversity management program. They'll be your local landowners, your neighbours, local school groups, community groups, Indigenous peoples, and other affected populations. So the entity has a responsibility and an obligation to make sure it is managing the biodiversity and ecosystem services for its external stakeholders. It's the services that the biodiversity provides to your external stakeholders that is very, very fundamental here. In terms of recreation, cultural, spiritual, it might be visual, the pollination services that it can provide, water filtration and cleaning, prevention of erosion and sedimentation. So it's important to not just consider the intrinsic value of the flora and fauna species, but the services that them and in their communities and habitats as a whole that they provide to external stakeholders and the earth in general. Criterion 8.4 of the standard refers to alien species. And this quite simply are those plants, animals, also pathogens, insects, etc., that if left unchecked or unmanaged could cause major environmental harm. Alien species should also be incorporated in your biodiversity action plan, and again, engage your external stakeholders in any mitigation actions that may be required. Criterion 8.5 refers to World Heritage Areas and a no-go principle, and that means that all ASI certified entities should not be operating in or adjacent to World Heritage properties. Criterion 8.6 refers to protected areas, and this requires entities to identify those protected areas that are adjacent to your operation or within your area of influence. To identify those spatially, and most importantly, ensure that the entity is complying with any legislative requirements for those protected areas. For bauxite mines, criterion 8.7 also applies, and this relates to rehabilitation. As with your biodiversity action plan, your rehabilitation plan also must be engaging with your external stakeholders on a regular basis and ensure that what you're doing with respect to rehabilitation is being publicly disclosed and communicated. Your rehabilitation plan needs to consider things like final landform, final species mix, research and development, completion criteria, provision for land access, and many other aspects. For further information on how to meet the biodiversity criteria in the ASI Performance Standard, please consult the ASI Performance Standard guidance document for useful tips, tools, tricks, and valuable links to help you on your way.